Like most people in my town, I put everything I have into my home and my business, so leaving isn't an option. Like most people in my town, I've seen them. Like most people in my town, I know the Dogman is real. Let me start by saying thank you for voicing our encounters over these years. I know the people that have sent in their sightings, and I know the burden of seeing these things in the flesh. I have, on multiple occasions, witnessed several different specimens of this creature around town and in the forests that surround us. I believe some of them are more aggressive than others, but all have the ability to tear a man apart. I joined this community years ago, unaware of the things that lurk in the shadows or hide behind the trees. I heard the rumors and scoffed at them for a long time, until the proof was undeniable and right in front of my face. I want to share these with you and your channel because I know that you have helped my friends in the past remain anonymous. These people in this town are important to me. Most of us are a tight-knit community, more or less a support group for each other because of the things that we see. Werewolves Anonymous, if you will. I'm just going to list these experiences as I think of them and try to put them in at least some kind of order, but they are by no means chronologic. I will try to start at the beginning, though. My name doesn't matter. Make it up or don't. It doesn't matter to me or these testaments. I own a business there, cutting grains, hay, and straw. I don't grow them myself. I'm contracted to go into the crops, cut, and transport. I lived about 2 hours away from Dogman Town, but purchased a small area here to let that business grow. It's not a big business by any means, nor is it fancy, but I put all of my eggs in this basket and took out a hell of a loan too. Basically, on this lot, there's enough room for a small office building for file keeping and contracts, a large barn, and the rest of the lot is basically just a parking area for our tractors, trucks, and machines that we use. This area is outside of the residential area, near the woods. I think that's why I've seen them multiple times on my property. They like to stay out of sight and away from people, most of the time. The first time I heard about the shit that goes on around here was the night I had a buddy of mine and his sister over for dinner. I'd met them the first week that I was in town, at a bar here, and we hit it off. Stacy and Tommy lived in a house that they inherited from their grandma when she passed away a few years back. Neither of them had ever married, so living in a house that was mostly paid off was financially sensible to them. The night I heard about the Dogmen, or Wolfmen as Tommy calls them, was about 2 months after I met them. It was after we ate, while we were just sitting in my living room, having some brewskis and shooting the shit. Tom had already had quite a few beers and was to the point where he was feeling pretty good, but also to the point where he was talking a lot. I remember him leaning in suddenly, very serious, but still obviously tipsy, and he asked me, "So have you seen them yet?" I also remember Stacy shooting him this annoyed look and saying, "Tom," like she was trying to get him to shut up. They exchanged a look and he shrugged. "Seen who?" I asked. Tom looked at me through drunken eyes and said, "The Wolfmen." I chuckled. Obviously, he was yanking my chain. I shook my head and told him he was going to have to try harder than that to scare me. Sorry to wet the paper for you, Tommy, but I stopped believing in monsters right around the same time I stopped checking under my bed for them. He stared at me for the longest time, as Stacy glared at him. Then he chuckled and smiled. "Sorry, man, just having fun," he said. But there was just something about the way he tried to brush it off that struck me as odd. That was about it for Monster Talk that night. We bullshitted for another 45 minutes or so before they took off and I went to bed. Another month went by. I was focused on work. It was harvest season after all, and I needed to make good on my contract so word of mouth could get my business going. Because at that time, that was all we had. I needed people to know that I was serious about their crops, and that I would do everything I could to transport everything they needed. During that time, nothing too odd happened. I did notice an abundance of missing pet flyers, though, and the town really quieted down after dark. But I didn't really give it too much thought either. It was just one of those small towns that was set in its ways. And again, I was too focused on my job to notice anything else. I guess at that point I was just trying to rationalize all these things in the back of my head. There's a lot of forest and a lot of open land. Pets go missing in areas like this all the time, right? The place I lived before this was an old farming town too, and I swear I saw more stray dogs or wandering dogs there than I'd ever seen in my life. Maybe people here were just better at putting up missing posters. I guess the first time I actually gave any thought to Tommy's question was one night when I was coming back late from a job. One of our machines had broken down, and I was in the field trying to get it to work. It was vital for this contract for that machine to do its job. Eventually, with the help of one of my employees, we got it fixed, and it was my hope that it would continue to operate the next day. This farmer's property was about 50 miles from my own. We got back around 11, and I told my employee, Kyle, to go home and get some rest, since we'd be up early in the morning to head back there. I was in the office alone, just thinking, weighing my options and thinking if I should take a large chunk of profits to replace this machine, when I heard those screams. At first, I had no idea what it could be. I was just drinking a soda pop and kicking back at the computer. I stopped and listened. It sounded human at first, but I admit I was spacing out. I remember sitting up and listening. My heart started beating a little faster. I thought it was somebody crying out for help at first. But then it happened again, and I thought to myself, what in the hell is that? Because it didn't sound like anything that I'd ever heard before. Now I'll be the first to tell you, I could take an engine apart. I could put it back together and have it work like new, but when it comes to identifying animals or woodland life, I ain't your guy. I mean, I camp and stuff, but can't go look at an animal track and go, oh yeah, that's a bear, or a coyote, or a doe. So, even though I don't know what it was, I wasn't too worried at this point because I figured maybe it was just some kind of wild animal call that I'd never heard before. But then I heard it again, and again, and it was just not right. Now I do encourage anyone listening to go listen to a clip of the werewolf from An American Werewolf in London screaming. Whoever the gentleman is behind Tales of the Supernatural sent me a link, and when I heard it, my blood damn near went cold. It was identical. Now I saw that movie years ago, but not any time around when I heard it. But after talking to our dear narrator, I decided to go watch that movie again. I just had to know. While the scream was the exact same terrifying scream, the things that I've seen don't look anything like the werewolf in this movie. More like the ones from Van Helsing, Bad Moon, or Underworld. Yeah, I watch a lot of werewolf movies. Like I said, I just need to know. Anyways, I sat there listening to these screams for a solid 30 minutes. It was like this thing was calling to another one and not getting a response. I even went outside to get a better listen. It was definitely a scream unlike anything this world naturally has to offer. After a while, the screams died down and I went to sleep. I have a little cot in the back room of the office I use sometimes when I don't feel like going home. This was one of those nights. I laid down, content that whatever was making those noises was gone, and I slept for a couple hours. I woke in the morning, met with Kyle, and we headed back out to the farm we were cutting. I told him about what I heard, and I knew he lived there a lot longer than me, so I was hoping that he could shed some light on whatever animal was out there in the forest. But he didn't really respond, though. He actually got really quiet for a while, like he was disturbed or something. I asked him if it was a wolfman, more joking than anything, but again he didn't really respond. So I pressed the matter. I asked him if he was superstitious or something, and if he really thought there was something out in the woods that runs around on two legs and howls at the moon. I don't like to talk about them, he told me. Sometimes if you talk about something, you invite it in. Admittedly, I rolled my eyes. Not yet a believer in these things, and just chalking it up to superstition or local lore, and letting it be. But then a little while later, he finally speaks up and he tells me, just be safe out there at night. If you hear those noises again, stay inside. And there was just something about the fear this guy was giving off that made me a little wary. I wasn't about to say that I believed in everything I heard, but It definitely made my imagination stir, and I thought to myself, well, what if there really is something out there? The first time I actually saw one of these things is a night I'll never forget. Even though the first time I saw one, I still tried to convince myself that it wasn't what everybody was telling me. That night was another one of those long work nights. It seemed that something or other was always going on the fritz and slowing us down. It was really frustrating, and I was having a hard time accepting the fact that this business could actually take off. This time it was one of the damn computers that was giving me trouble, and I was on the phone with one of those 24-hour helplines to fix some bug that the computer had. Luckily, this kind lady was smart and patient and was able to help me with whatever upgrade kept failing on the computer. It was after 11 when I finally went on my way home. I thought about sleeping in the office again that night, but I had some leftovers that were calling my name, so I decided to go back to my place. If I hadn't, it probably would have taken a lot longer to accept what goes on around here. The roads from the office to home are dark. No lights, tree line on both sides, one lane coming, one lane going. You get the picture. So I'm driving home, actually in a good mood since the computer was fixed and just bebopping to some old rock and roll when this humongous creature darts out in front of me. Now here's a description to quench your thirst. It was on all fours, but even on all fours, it looked to be a good 4 or 5 feet at the shoulder. The head was as large as I've ever seen on any type of canine. Just massive. It had a pointed snout, big teeth you could see since the mouth was open, a big black nose and pointed ears. The eye that I could see reflected the light of my truck, like a cat's eyes do. It had long shaggy fur, like a husky or a German shepherd, but it was completely gray in color. It had a tail that I would also compare to a husky's tail, long and fluffy. When it ran, it loped like a wolf, but knowing what I know now, I can assure you, it was no wolf. It was one of them. Now, I've heard a lot of stories where these creatures, whether on 4 legs or 2, run straight across the road, almost like they're trying to get you to crash. Straight across in the blink of an eye. This sighting wasn't like that, though. This creature ran at an angle. It passed the front of my truck, then started going in a straight line in the other lane, like it was running with me. It was wicked fast. It took gigantic strides. I slowed a little to keep pace with it, more curious than scared since I was in the safety of my truck. But then this thing looked back over at me, over its shoulder, and I got the distinct impression that it was trying to set a trap, and that this thing wanted to hurt me. I just got this gut feeling like something was wrong and that I wasn't safe, even in my truck, and that I definitely wasn't supposed to be on that road at that moment. I admit, I shivered, sped up, and got the hell out of there. I drove home, hurrying inside and even checking through my blinds. I didn't see anything out there and started to feel a little dumb. I guess after the fight or flight reaction was over, my brain tried to rationalize what I saw to deal with how creeped out I was. I passed it off as my overactive imagination and some kind of collective hysteria that I felt after talking about these creatures with these people in town. But I couldn't get what I saw out of my mind. I thought about that creature for days, not saying anything to anyone, but thinking about what I saw over and over. I mean, we're talking borderline obsession with this thing, until I finally pulled Kyle aside and talked to him about it. Now Kyle, he's a lot younger than me, but he's a good kid, very hardworking, and very respectful. He has a wife and 2 little girls that he adores and busts his ass for. I knew I could trust him to give it to me straight, so I told him what I saw. I tried to brush it off as a wolf, or even the world's largest dog, but he wasn't convinced that's what I saw. And honestly, I wasn't either anymore. I just kept thinking back to the night Tommy was talking about werewolves, or wolfmen, or whatever. To me, the thing I saw matched what I would think a werewolf looked like. I guess there's a difference, though. The thing I saw had a tail. Anyways, I told Kyle what I saw, and he just went real quiet. Like he wanted to say something, but was convinced that he shouldn't. He kept looking down, looking around him, like he didn't want to talk or look at me. So I decided to cut the shit and get to the bottom of what I saw. This guy I know would say it's a wolf man, I blurted out. I swear, I've never seen someone's eyes go as big as his did. I told you I don't like talking about them, he told me quietly. But then he looked up at me, and I swear I thought I was going to see a grown man cry at this point. But if you saw one too, you have the right to know. I asked him if he wanted to bring his family over for dinner that night so the two of us could discuss it. He nodded, but said he didn't want the girls to hear what he and his wife were going to tell me, so I should just go over there instead so they could go play in their room. I agreed to those terms, and I told him I still wanted to bring dinner though, as a thank you, since I knew it was hard for him. That night was the most eye-opening night of my life. The night I went over to have dinner with Kyle and Aaron, I went from a skeptical believer to someone that looks at the world a lot differently. I'm going to pause my own story here to tell you the things that they told me. I guarantee you, if you were sitting at the table with them that night, you would know everything that I'm about to share with you is the God's honest truth. I don't know Kyle or Aaron to be liars. With everything I've seen here, I believe every last syllable that they told me. The night they became keenly aware of the existence of these creatures was the night they moved into the house that they still live in. They were expecting their first, and Erin's back was giving her a hell of a time since she was pretty far along. So she went upstairs to take a hot shower to try and relieve the aches. Kyle was sitting in the living room watching the tube when he heard the back door rattling, like someone was trying to open it. Thank God it was locked, right? Or who knows what the hell would have happened. Now, because the only two people that lived in that house were currently inside, Kyle knew that something wasn't right, although a wolfman was far from the top of his list of suspects. He just assumed an intruder. He alerted Aaron, grabbed his pistol, and went the opposite way to defend them. Before he could even get a good look, he said something massive ran across the wooden deck the opposite direction, smashed through a wooden chair they had out there, and took off into the night. He swears it sounded too big to be a person, especially considering what happened next. He called the sheriff, who came out to take a look with his deputy. They didn't find anything, but to Kyle, both officers of the law seemed agitated, like they were scared to be out there. And they just kept on giving each other this look that told Kyle that they knew something that they weren't sharing with him. All they did was tell him and Aaron to stay inside for the night, not to investigate anything they might hear. But they didn't need to go outside to investigate. All they had to do was look out the window later. You see, Aaron was scared that night, and I don't blame her. She didn't sleep much, and Kyle was right there by her side, being a dutiful husband and keeping an eye out on things. From what he tells me, they saw the damn thing in the early hours of the morning. It was lurking around the front yard, like it was searching for something, sniffing around, and things like that. Luckily, Kyle was the first to see it. I think if he hadn't prepared Aaron, it could have been bad, since she was already shaken up. Hell, she might have went into labor right then and there in their house. But here this thing was. A gigantic wolf, prowling around right in front of them. But here's the kicker. As they're watching from the window of what was about to be their nursery, lights off I might add, this damn thing shifted from 4 legs to 2 and started looking in the bed of Aaron's truck. To say they had a what in the hell moment would be an understatement. They were both rightly terrified at the sight of this thing. Kyle described what he felt as a kind of terror that grips you so hard you lose your ability to move. He said he was barely breathing watching this thing that to them could have been a werewolf, and it was right out of a scary movie. Aaron was so scared she spun away from the window and covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Kyle backed away from the window, not wanting this thing to catch sight of him. He took his wife's hand to lead her into the master bedroom, where his pistol was still ready. As he's telling me this story, he stops, looks me dead in the eyes, and says, "A pistol isn't going to do a damn thing to these things." I could see that. The thing I saw was a freak of nature in size. Kyle told me that after they witnessed this thing shift onto 2 legs, it took off, like it was bored or something. Or maybe it was looking for an easy meal that it couldn't find. They were up the rest of the night. Aaron pacing back and forth, praying quietly. Kyle quietly looking out the window upstairs, lights still off, trying to stay hidden. After that, I guess they tried to get out of the mortgage, attempting to get away from the beast, but they had threats of litigation and whatnot. They seemed to have no other option. They were stuck there, just like a lot of people around here. Just like myself. They started taking proper precautions, though. Security lights, extra locks, a new shotgun, but after you see something like that, it's always in the back of your mind. It makes you grateful for the daylight hours and dread the darkness. For some reason, most of the time, they only appear at night. Although, there have been cases where these things have been seen in broad daylight. But most of the time, they come at night. But that's not the only time my two friends here have seen them either. They've run into these things numerous times. Not always as eventful as that night, but around here, you just know when you're not alone. They've heard those screams dozens of times, smelled the telltale odor that comes with them, seen them late at night on those country roads just like I did. A time or two, they've had the unmistakable encounter when the night goes quiet as a church mouse. And you know what? I've experienced those nights too. That's when you know that something big and dangerous is in the area, and it's time to go back inside. Of course, they've reached out to our other friends around here and heard their stories too. But if I were to list every encounter that I've heard from Kyle, Tom, or our other friends, I'd never finish this email. But because of Aaron and Kyle, my eyes were open that night. As I'm sitting there, just taking all of this in, thinking about how everything I ever thought my whole life was just a big lie, Aaron looks at Kyle and says something along the lines of, "I know this one will give me nightmares, but I'm going to tell him about it anyway." Kyle gave her this look like he was understanding but worried, and just nodded to her gently. Side note, it was that little interaction between the two of them that made me realize how much they love each other. Just shouting it out to my friends, because I know you're probably listening to this too. So anyways, there was this incident a year or so before they're telling me this, where Aaron was alone with the girls. Kyle hadn't gotten home yet. And then she saw one of these things up in a tree. She was washing some dishes from a meal that she'd made the girls and just happened to catch a glimpse of something large in the tree out front, facing their window and apparently staring right into the house. She said she froze. She knew exactly what she was looking at, and it was no more than a stone's throw from the house. I remember actually turning around and looking out of the window at that same tree that thing was in. Too close to the house. Way too close. Aaron said this thing locked eyes with her, and because of that, she was suddenly aware of how intelligent this creature was. It was crouched on a big tree limb, holding onto the trunk with one hand, while the other rested on the limb it was sitting on, in between its legs. Now, this one that she was looking at, it didn't look like the same one they had seen years back. Wrong color, noticeably smaller. This thing wasn't breaking eye contact with her, though, and it looked like it was actually smiling at her, although it was a sinister smile, as she described it. She said she backed away from the sink without looking away because she didn't want to lose sight of it. She scooped up the girls and then took off upstairs into her room, where all the guns were now. At this point, they had quite a few guns in the safe. A couple of rifles, a couple of shotguns, half a dozen handguns. From what I understand, Aaron's a pretty damn good shot, too. She called Kyle in a frenzy and started crying on the phone to him. He told me he's never driven so fast in his life. His family was the only thing that mattered, and the only thing he was thinking about. But Aaron was afraid of what would happen when he got there. What if that thing was still in the tree? Or worse, lurking somewhere outside and could ambush him? He didn't care, though. He just wanted to get to his 3 girls. When he got home, it was gone, luckily. But there were scratch marks up on that tree trunk, and where that thing had been sitting. The thing that scared Aaron the most, though, was how stealthy it was getting into that tree. Since it was right outside of their house, she could see it the entire time. She'd been standing at that sink for several minutes, she never saw it on the ground, so she doesn't even know how long it was up there before she noticed it. Doesn't know how long it was staring at her. And more importantly, doesn't know what it wanted. All she knew is that it felt like it wanted to scare her. That it wanted her to know that it was there. After that, they got their dog that they currently still have. He's a big dog too. Mastiff and lab. Smart as hell, and very protective over his family, but still friendly enough to welcome a stranger into his home. Not that he'd be able to take one of these things down either, but I firmly believe they're smart enough to know when to avoid a situation. They haven't had one or two of those small encounters directly around their house ever since getting Zeus. So back to my own stories. After talking with Kyle and Aaron, I was right freaked out. If half of the shit that they told me just had a lick of truth, it was enough to make you hide under your sheets, right? I went home, driving without my music, just lost in thought. Went directly inside, got my own shotgun, and checked more than once to make sure all my doors and windows were locked that night. The next time I experienced one of these things was again at my office. And again, it was really late at night because I was doing payroll. Now I can't be 100% certain to say that what I experienced that night was a dogman, but I'll tell you what happened and you can be the judge of it. I went outside for a smoke after I'd finished writing the checks. It was nice out. A little warm, but also a little breeze blowing. As I'm sitting on my chair out there, everything goes dead silent. Oh shit, right? I mean, we're talking bugs chirping and clicking like mad, frogs going off, a few nightbirds, and then it's like mute on a TV. Of course, I start thinking about Kyle and his monster stories, and my imagination starts going haywire. And my heart starts beating faster along with that imagination. Then, before I can decide whether or not to just go inside, I'm hit with this funk that I can barely describe. It was extremely pungent, like the sour smell of rot and a strong smell of urine. It was enough to make the spit at the back of my mouth thicken, and I winced as this smell invaded my nose. I've never smelled something so gross. And then I hear this growl, not like a wolf or dog. It was something enormous, like the size of that thing I saw on the road. So my mind starts going back to that creature. This growl was deep. It sounded pissed off, very angry. But most importantly, it sounded really friggin' close. It sounded like it was right around the corner of the office to me. Them thoughts of Kyle and Aaron were enough to get my ass back inside without another thought. I sprinted back in, locked the door, and stood back, looking around the room for any windows that I might have left open. But luckily, there were none. Then I realized I didn't even have time to put my cigarette out, so I just tossed it on the ground and put it out with the boot of my shoe. And then I heard something big kicking up the gravel right outside to my left and listened as whatever it was made its way around the corner to the right in front of my damn front door. Admittedly, my mind is racing with thoughts of wolfmen and monsters, so I wasn't exactly eager to look out the window, you feel me? What I felt was cold, like the cold you get when your nerves are tormenting you, and my breaths were actually catching in my throat. I could hear that growling and this grunting noise even from inside the office. And let me tell you this, whatever was out there was bigger than any animal that I could think would be out there growling. I could tell you that for damn certain, even though I didn't see that thing. I kept thinking about how the one that terrorized Kyle that night tried to use the doorknob. My eyes shot to the door as this thing sounded like it passed by, but luckily it didn't try to open the door, because I don't know what I would have done. As whatever was out there moved around the office, I quietly followed from inside. I've never walked so damn tenderly my entire life. This thing, whatever it was, must have circled me half a dozen times before I heard this huffing sound, like it was frustrated or something. Now you tell me, what kind of animal can exhibit that type of awareness? Especially in North America. Then this thing let out another nightmare-causing growl, and it sounded like it dropped down to the ground and bounded off towards the woods. That's when I had the stones to finally look out the window. When I didn't see anything, I gave it a couple minutes before I took off to my truck and got the hell out of there. I was in shock. I was certain I just encountered Kyle's monster even though I didn't see it. I remember driving with one hand on the wheel and the other covering my mouth in shock of what I just saw. I called Kyle, apologized for calling him late, and told him I thought I just ran into one. He asked me if I wanted to come talk about it. I did, so he let me into his home. We sat outside on his back patio and talked about it over a beer or two. I told him everything that happened, and he told me that he thinks it was one of those too. I went home that night, lost in my own thoughts, poured another drink and sat on the couch, thinking about everything. My mind was on my business, my livelihood. How is it supposed to continue if a monster was stalking the forest around it? I put everything into this business. I couldn't go anywhere, but I also couldn't put my men in danger knowing that something big and scary was out there. I called Tom after a while and told him one of his wolf men was outside my office. He laughed for a second until I didn't respond. He asked me if I was serious. I told him I was, and he got more serious than I'd ever known him to be. And he told me, "I'll come by the lot tomorrow, and we can talk." I went back to the office the next morning to get going on my list of things to do, fully expecting Kyle to call out. He got there right after I did, though, ready to work. As we're talking, though, another truck pulled up. This one belonged to Tom. He and Stacy both got out of the cab and came out to us, ready to tell me the secrets of this crazy little town, I guess. I saw the rifle on the mount of his truck. Stacy was carrying a weapon, too. Tom said he wanted to look around the outside of the office for any signs of what was truly out there, making sure that it was in fact one of them. So the four of us walked the perimeter, looking for signs of a monster, but we didn't see anything. Then Stacy said it was time for me to hear what they've seen. I told Kyle we weren't doing anything that day. We'd just have to make it up a different day, but that I'd still pay for him. He nodded, grateful, but said he wasn't going home yet either. He wanted to hear what Tom and Stacy had to say. Their stories are the same as most of the ones around here. Seeing them running across the road, having a couple of dogs come up missing back in the day, before they figured out what was going on. A couple of times, they heard something large walking on their roof. I guess these creatures like to do that. They've seen kill sites when they go out into the forest. Not that I have any idea why they'd go out there myself, but I guess some people just like to live on the edge, right? What I've learned about these creatures is even though so many of us have seen them around here, these encounters aren't as close together as these stories make it sound. Yes, we do see them often, but when you just list all the times you've seen them, it can make it sound like it happens every day. These stories are throughout several years, decades for some people, since they've been seeing them for so long. The story that Tom and Stacy have that hit me the hardest, though, was the night they actually saw one of these things looking right into their living room window. Stacy says it was around midnight. They were up watching a TV show or something, and they'd been in the same room for over an hour. Then, Tom turns the TV down and psst at Stacy, obviously wanting her attention. She looks over at him, and he whispers, "Window." She said she looked over and did everything she could to keep from jumping up and screaming because she saw a massive wolf's head right at the glass. The two of them were trying to act normal, like they didn't see it or something, but kept looking at it out of the corner of their eyes, so they got a really good look at it. I guess they wanted to act normal to make sure this creature didn't realize that they had already seen it. Tom said the head was bigger than anything he's ever encountered. The ears were these long, skinny ears that reminded him of a dog with its ears cropped. The eyes looked reflective, and its tongue was long and pink, which was hanging out of its mouth. Stacy is absolutely positive that this face had numerous scars all over it, and that this thing's muzzle was actually pressed against the glass, because she could see smudge marks on the glass. She thinks this thing was no stranger to fighting, as proven by the scars that she saw on its face. It had tan fur with darker bits of brown mixed in, and this thing was just staring at them, looking right into the window like it wanted to know what was going on in there. They were both sure that it could smash through the glass and end them without a problem. But Here's the thing. All this thing ever did was stare at them. It must have been a solid 5 minutes, maybe even more, where this monster was just staring in the window, sizing them up or something, or maybe just watching how they act. But it never tried to get in. Eventually, Tom got up, and this thing darted away from the window like it didn't want to be seen. They went into the kitchen to try to calm down. Tom says he remembers being so upset that his fingers felt numb. And Stacy wanted to grab her things and get right the hell out of there that same night. Except neither of them actually wanted to go outside. The next morning, they went out to take a look, see if they could find any evidence that it was out there the night before. They found deep scratches around the window where they saw it, like it was hunched over and grabbing the frame to get a good look in. They went into town that day to get floodlights for around the house. The lights had motion sensors on them to turn on anytime something tripped the beam, and it seemed to work for a long while. But one night, they caught this thing roaming around their property again, and apparently, this thing was intelligent enough to learn where it could stand to stay in the shadows. Now think about that for a minute. How intelligent do these creatures have to be to learn that kind of pattern? This particular night that they saw the Dogman again, it didn't do much besides stick to the shadows for a little bit before taking off back to wherever the hell these things come from. But it was enough to unnerve my friends for another night, and they set up together with their guns at the ready just in case it came back. The next morning, after they saw that Dogman again, they went back into town and got lights that they could just keep on the entire night. It seems a lot of people around here have those same type of lights nowadays. I know I do. If these things enjoy sticking to the shadows, the best way to deter them from coming onto your property is to light up your yard from dusk until dawn. Things were good for a long while after that. Like I said, we looked around but couldn't find any tracks of this creature, so I just went about my business. About 7 months later is when I caught sight of another one of these things. It was at the yard, once again. See, at the yard I have these big storage containers, like you see on shipping freighters. The point of these are to house equipment that doesn't fit anywhere else, or extra supplies that I have no other place for. These cargo containers are fairly large and stand about 10 feet tall. I use them to keep all the stuff out of the rain when the weather goes bad. That night, I was there alone again, and I was outside at my truck before heading into the office. For one reason or another, I just happened to catch a glimpse of this thing. And even now, I can tell you I had the luck of seeing this thing, because it was so stealthy. Honestly, I don't even know why I looked over in that direction, because I wasn't headed that way. But I did, and I saw one of those things yet again. When I first saw it, it was splayed out like a cat stalking prey up on top of one of those containers. Even looking at it from the distance that I was at, I could tell this thing was huge. I was about 100 yards away from the container that it was on. What I saw at first was just a black mass that was contrasted by the lights in the yard that were near this thing. When I saw it, I stopped cold dead in my tracks though, and I just stood there watching it, seeing what it was doing, not wanting to run or head either direction because I didn't want this thing to give chase. When you see something like this, even if you've experienced them before, being this close to one of them makes your blood run cold. Period. I could feel the chill go all the way down my spine. As I'm watching this thing, it's watching me too. It's moving its head back and forth, looking at me. Kind of like chickens do when they bob their heads back and forth. Its body was swaying a little bit too, but mostly it was just the head moving. What I saw was a very large animal with broad shoulders and long arms, and I could make out those glowing eyes on and off depending on which way the creature's head was facing. I didn't get too many other details of this thing because the lighting situation sucked and I was trying not to look at it so much. But I decided I wasn't sticking around for this encounter. I wasn't going back into the office to get trapped in there again, so I slowly started backing away to my truck, looking over my shoulder too, just in case there was another one of these things. For some reason, I just got this feeling that I was not alone with this creature, and that another one was somewhere close by. And the air felt weird too, like tingly or something. A while after I saw this one, I heard they come with some sort of atmospheric static, and I could vouch for that. It did feel like the air was energized or something. But anyway, as I'm backing away, I hear these loud barks coming from behind the container in the field on the other side of the chain link fence that separates my property from the next lot. It sounded far enough away to where I didn't feel like I had to run for my life, but it did solidify my feeling that there was more than one of these creatures in the area. And this bark, it didn't sound like a dog. It was different and deeper. Honestly, it sounded like the raptors when they call each other in Jurassic Park, if I had to compare it to anything. But, again, it didn't exactly sound like that either. That's just the closest thing that I can compare it to. As soon as this thing behind it started barking, the one on top of the container looks back in that direction, over its shoulder, and then looks back at me, and stands up. This was the first time I saw one stand on 2 feet myself. Let me tell you, seeing these things on its hind legs makes them even more impressive and even scarier. Now at this point, I'm still stopped cold dead in my tracks again, because now I know that there's at least 2 of them in my vicinity. And then this creature turns around on the container and walks slowly to the other side and jumps off, still on 2 legs, just like a man would do. Then I could hear this thing moving behind the container because it was so big. I could hear things getting knocked over. I could hear the chain link rattling. And then another bark, like the one that was calling this one back to where it was repeating itself. At that point, I snapped out of it, hustled my ass back to my truck, and got the hell out of there. What I saw stand up was very human-like in shape, but not the size. We're tiny in comparison to these creatures. The limbs on these things are insanely long. I got a good look at the arms the first time, and I got a good look at the arms while it was sitting there, stalking me. But as it stood up, I could see how impressive of a specimen these creatures are, because everything about it is just built so massively. Even in the crappy lighting, I could see the silhouette of a large head, larger than any creature should be. Since I've seen them a handful of times more, I can tell you, most of these creatures look just as big. I hear stories about younger ones, smaller ones, maybe juveniles, but the ones that I've seen, they're all massive. I've seen them run across the road one other time. This one had different markings than the first one though, so I definitely believe it was a different creature. Same species, but different creature. This one looked bigger too. It was on 4 legs again, and ran with this sort of limping gait, so I'm not sure if it was injured or if that's just how this particular one ran. Either way, this one was pretty damn fast too. It cleared the road within a couple of seconds, and I wasn't foolish enough to slow down or stop to take a look. I sped up and drove home. One time I found a deer carcass all slashed up. It was chewed up at the very back of my property. Most of it was intact. It's not like those cases you hear where the heads are ripped off and found somewhere else. This just looked like maybe this creature either caught this poor deer right there and drug it over there to eat it, or maybe found it dead and scavenged it. I called animal control and they got the carcass, but I never heard anything back from them. They did comment on the markings, talking about how this poor creature was really messed up and wouldn't want to see the thing that got a hold of it. But I got the impression they knew what was going on as well, but I didn't mention anything to them and they didn't bring the subject up to me. I saw one again a while later in one of the cornfields around town. This time it was at sunset. It was in October. The way it was standing there in the corn rows, moving as the stalks moved back and forth, made it as creepy as hell. The wind was blowing the stalks, and this creature was just swaying back and forth with them. I could actually see the hair on the top of its head and on the tips of its ears moving in the breeze too. It was like I was living in some scary movie at the time. This thing was as tall as the stalks and a mix of tan and black. It had the same dog head and the same giant build that all of them have. Sometimes I get to the office early in the morning and just feel the atmosphere is different, or I get a whiff of that nasty smell. Sometimes you get the feeling that you're not alone in that area, or that you're being watched. You can chalk it up to our imaginations if you want, but I'd like to think of it as instincts and experience living around these creatures so often. Sometimes, I'd also get to the yard and feel like something was there during the night, when the place was empty. Sometimes things are knocked over that shouldn't be because they're too heavy. The wind didn't blow them over, and nobody else is strong enough to move them. But this thing, these creatures, they're strong enough to do whatever the hell they want. Those times when I feel like these creatures were around when I wasn't at night, you can also get a whiff of that stench. And other times, you can get a whiff of urine so strong that it burns your nostrils. It's like these things are marking their territory or something. Other times still, when you're outside and everything goes quiet, that's when you know it's time to go back inside, like I said earlier. Just make sure you take everyone with you, including your pets. Even your big dogs can't stand up against these creatures. I've heard of several different encounters where people have heard their animals crying out at night, only to find out that they were fighting some kind of monster outside, never to be seen again. Usually those are the people that aren't familiar with what goes on around here, but once they experience it, they know better. I myself never leave my dogs outside, unless I'm there right with them. And even then, I still feel like sometimes we're being watched, because I feel these dogmen might see our pets as easy prey. That's really all the stuff that I'm willing to share for the moment, but I do know of a lot of other encounters that other people have shared with me. And now, I'll tell you all about the other things that I've heard. I've heard other accounts from other people here, and I know that some of those accounts have been spoken about in the testimonies of other people from my town that have already been in contact with you. But I'll list the ones that I've heard here anyways, just in case they missed any. My friend Barb saw one of these creatures looking in her window a long time ago, late at night, and it scared the hell out of her. The window that the creature was looking into was about 6 feet up in the air, and in her kitchen, so it didn't have any blinds or curtains on it. She still lives in the same house that she saw the dogman at, and when I found out that she had seen one, I went to the window to see how tall it was. I could barely look into this window, standing on my tiptoes and pulling myself up a little bit on the ledge. She said when she saw the dogman that night, it looked like it was leaning down, peering right into the window, so this creature had to be at least 7 feet tall. Barb's daughter saw one on the road a couple of times too. She saw it on 2 legs once, and 4 legs 2 other times. But all 3 of these times were frightening for her. All 3 of the creatures that she saw were very big, and very fast. She describes them as looking different than each other, but none of these creatures seemed to be afraid of her car either. They simply ran across the road and paid no attention to her whatsoever. That seemed to be a popular way to see them around here, running across the road like that. I also know a couple of people that have lost pets here when they were left out at night, or even sometimes during the day. 2 different guys I know have lost big breed dogs that have just seemed to vanish into thin air. One of my buddies that I'm talking about actually heard his dog fighting something, and then a big yelp from his dog, followed by some kind of horrific growl. When he went out there, it was too late. All he found was blood on the grass. Hearing that kind of reminded me of this YouTube video I saw one time where this leopard actually snuck up on a dog. I mean, this cat was right there on this dog as it slept, and the dog didn't know it at all. Maybe these dogmen are just as stealthy as that leopard, and they see those dogs as a food source. Other people I know have heard something big moving around on their patios or through gravel outside of their house. They've also found things knocked over, like I do at the yard. These are heavy objects that you would have to purposely knock over, not just lawn chairs or garbage cans that could be bumped and fall over or blow over in the wind. These are things like big heavy sculptures, or even those big giant rocks you use for pool decorations right outside of the pool. One of my friends had one of those big ass boulders moved all the way across his yard, and another one he found all the way into the forest. It's like this thing deliberately picked it up and moved it just to confuse them. Other people have even found them rummaging through their garbage cans, or heard them rummaging through their garbage cans. Other people still have found thick branches of their trees snapped off and moved to places where the wind couldn't possibly move them to. Other people have experienced them rummaging around sheds, like Eric and Kate's friend Shelley. Sometimes they're even digging through the sheds looking for God knows what. And all of us around here are certain that it's not the same animal either, because so many different people see them with gray fur, or brown fur, or black fur. Sometimes the descriptions don't match the other ones. Some are big, some are tall and lean, some are short and muscular. So there's got to be some kind of population around here. People here fear there's a whole pack of them somewhere in the woods, but honestly I don't know what to think myself. I do believe there are multiple dogmen out there, but whether they work in a pack or not, I don't know. I know they at least work in pairs because of the experience that I've had in my yard. But my question is, do they run in large packs? If they do, then why haven't we seen them in all these years that people have been experiencing all this crazy shit? Nobody around here has ever seen a pack of them moving around at once. I know all of this sounds like some seriously scary stuff, but we also have to remember that no one's ever really been hurt by these creatures. Animals, yes, but those poor animals, like I said, could be a food source for these creatures. They're big predators and they're not going to pass away a free meal. Some of us have been chased by these creatures, but it could just be them telling us to get out of their territory. Of course, there was that hunter that went missing all those years ago now. Nothing was ever conclusive with that, though. I mean, they did find his body, but nobody ever told us how he died. It could have been a dogman, I suppose, but if it wasn't one of these things, then I would hate to put the blame on one, just because it's convenient. The things we see here don't seem very aggressive to me. Not like the tales of the beast of the land between the lakes. We've never found any campers or hikers slaughtered, and we've never found anybody stuffed up in a tree, half eaten by one of these things like the beast from the land between the lakes allegedly did. Even though I believe these things are more curious than aggressive, I'm still not putting that theory to the test. I don't really know the first gal that contacted you, but I have heard that she saw these creatures multiple times. Once going through the shed like they seem to do around here. Maybe it's looking for something useful. I know that one of the tales from before said that these creatures can use tools, but I've never seen one running with a hammer or anything like that. The other time that girl Shelley saw it, it was running away from her home, and all she saw was just the rump of a big gray animal. But it was enough to convince her that it was one of these things. One other time, they didn't see it, I believe, but they heard one of them screaming. Let me tell you, if you've heard them screaming, you can never describe exactly what it's like. And those screams, they stay with you forever. Just like these sightings do. Seeing something like that kind of changes your perspective on the world. Because if these things exist, then what the hell else can exist? But there's so many different theories out there regarding what they are. Maybe they are just some kind of animal that's really good at hiding, and we just haven't discovered it yet. I mean, everybody thought gorillas were a myth until the 20s, I believe, until some scientists went out there and found one, so maybe these creatures are just like that. One other buddy that I have of mine, Duncan, has a story that's worth telling. He saw one of these creatures watching the cows that he owns one evening as the sun was setting. This thing also saw Duncan. I guess they made eye contact, and this thing got up and went back into the forest, deciding it wasn't going to do whatever it had planned to do. When it walked into the forest, though, it was nice and calm, even looking back once and taking a final look at Duncan before it disappeared. Personally, I think it was planning to take a calf there, because every once in a while, and I'm talking on very rare instances, a calf or another smaller animal on these ranches or farms go missing. Sometimes they're right here in town, other times they're in neighboring areas, but anytime they do vanish, it's without a trace, just like most of our animals around here. And then, of course, you have my friends Eric and Kate. Now, they're actually the ones that had me write this up. I didn't want to at first, but they told me that I could do it anonymously, and that people listening do enjoy listening to our encounters. Well, I say, why don't you come here and experience it yourself like we do, and see if you still enjoy these encounters. And I know some of you might say, just tell us where you live then. No thank you. You stay where you are. Listen to these stories from afar. Be entertained at your computer. We don't want you here. As for Eric and Shelley, though, they've come across these things too many times. More times than I would personally be comfortable with. Why they haven't moved is just a testament to their resolve, but these are the things I know that's happened to them. They actually saw one of them walking around on their property late one night. To them it seemed like it was staying in the shadows, trying its hardest to stay out of the light, but they got a good look at this thing anyway. It was moving around on all fours, quickly, but not exactly running. It was sniffing around their yard like it was looking for something. It sniffed around their garbage cans and some other things in the backyard too, but kept gravitating towards this area where they actually buried a cat a few days prior. Eric said that it would sniff around the ground like it was excited or something, and started making these yipping noises right around where that cat was buried. They said it must have been in their backyard for more than 10 minutes, and then it did one hell of a thing. Because quicker than a hiccup, this thing spins around towards the house and stands up on its hind legs at the same time, and looks directly into the window that they were watching from on the second story. Kate said it was like this thing knew exactly where they were, because it honed right in on that window and screamed. And then it just stood there, looking right at that window, while they dodged out of sight. Kate said that was the largest one that she'd ever seen, and estimated it at about 8 feet tall. All the while, their dog is going crazy too, like it smelled that predator outside. And that dog actually gave them an early warning another time when one of those dogmen were around. They knew by the reaction the dog had the first time they saw the dogman in their backyard that another one was back. They actually didn't see it that time, but what they did experience was extremely heavy footsteps walking around on the front porch of their home. To them, it sounded like it would walk one way, all the way to the end of the house, turn around, and walk all the way back again. They've heard what they call unearthly screaming more times than they can count, both outside of their home and when they're in the forest at times. They butt up to a forest that's probably 10,000 acres of just woods and waterways, and an actual national park starts up right after that. So my theory is that that is the reason they experience them more often than I do, because they have so much more woodland area right next to their home, where these creatures can just move around as they please without being detected. They've also seen these creatures run across the road, just like I have, and it seems they're always able to get a better look at these creatures than I do myself. One time, they said they saw one of the creatures that was so tall it had to tower over the tallest man in the world. Even under the hair, you could see how muscular this thing was. It was dark gray, but had other colors mixed in it too, like brown and black and tan. This one was running on 2 legs, and they said it swung its arms around like a man does when he runs. One time they even saw a smaller one running across the road. They think that one was a juvenile based off of its size. So obviously there's probably a breeding population of them somewhere in the forest behind their house. One of the times they saw the creature run across the road, it was actually carrying what they think was a dead raccoon in its hand. Another theory I have is that these things don't pass up a free meal, and it might have actually scavenged that raccoon from a roadkill incident. Eric and Kate have experienced the dogman walking on their patio, even walking on their roof once or twice. They go out into the forest sometimes and see claw marks high up in trees where nothing else can reach. We think that's the way they mark their territory, letting other dogmen know that that area is theirs. And just like Tommy and Stacy, Eric and Kate too have experienced one of these dogmen peering into one of their windows late at night. Kate was the one to notice it. She told me she saw its head moving back and forth, just like that thing was doing when I saw it on top of the cargo container. But when she noticed it, it realized she was looking at it and quickly pulled away and ran into the night. She ran upstairs yelling for her husband, but by the time he got down there, it was long gone. And another time, while they were driving late at night, they saw one of those creatures not too far from their home, just standing in front of the tree line, staring at them as they drove by. This one didn't run across the road, though. It just stared at them, and only slightly moved back into the trees to get out of sight. And the last thing I know that they experienced was them telling me their encounters that they heard what they described as death cries and screaming one night. It was like something was being ripped apart by these creatures, and whatever it was, most likely a deer, sounded terrified. They heard these distinct yipping and barking noises that they think were coming from more than one of those creatures. Kate believes that this poor creature was being ripped apart while it was still alive, and devoured like a pack of wild dogs does. One final thing that I want to tell you about before I finally wrap up this email is there's another guy who I used to be friends with, but since then we've had a falling out. But I can tell you about his experiences with the Dogman too. There was one in his backyard years ago that he ended up chasing off, and as he was doing it, this damn thing actually smashed through his fence. It happened late one night. He heard his dog going crazy outside, and this was before he knew about these creatures. That's why his dog was out there. He went outside to check on what was going on. I guess he'd had these incidences in the past where there'd been coyotes or bears or something on his property, so he took his rifle out there with him to scare whatever it was off. But he ended up being scared by what he saw, because he saw one of these creatures walking up to his property on its hind legs, so he popped off a warning shot to scare it away. It didn't do the trick though, because this thing actually stayed there standing its ground. So he aimed the rifle at it, and it actually acted like it knew what a gun was. When that thing saw the rifle, it took off, went to jump over the wooden fence, but ended up crashing through the top of it, splintering the wood. The damage was so bad, he ended up pulling down the whole fence to repair it all, and just put up a new one. He also saw two other dogmen on the side of the road years after that. One was running across the street while the other one watched, and he thought that the one running was actually causing a trap to try to get him to crash so the other one could go in for an attack. So there you have it. What I know about where I live and the things that I see. I'd like to repeat myself that even though it sounds like we see them daily, these experiences are from decades of people seeing them. Granted, we probably do see them more frequently than most places, but if you take a look at what I call the main three, being the Beast of Bray Road, the Land Between the Lakes, and the Michigan Dogman, there's probably just as many sightings going back and talking with people. Some places just have the right type of environment that suits them. Or maybe your theory that we talked about is right. That these places are gateways to wherever the hell these things come from. What I would like the people listening to this to take away from my experiences is these things are real. Very real. These things are intelligent. Maybe the most intelligent creatures out there other than ourselves. They have the capability to be very dangerous, but if you take the right precautions, they're just as safe as any other animal. The forests around here are avoided by people, sure, but so are places with all those big great white shark attacks, or places in Africa where the chances of getting attacked by lions are higher, and those rivers and lakes where saltwater crocodiles have a high population. The only thing is, here in the United States, we just have the luxury of not worrying about as many wild animals, just because the wildlife around here are relatively safer than those other places. But seeing these things is a truly eye-opening experience, and understandably frightening. But I also don't want to scapegoat these things, because the truth is, they live here too, and they were probably here before us. We have no idea what they want, how they got here, how many there are, how they breed. They could just be a naturally curious animal, and that's why we're always seeing them, watching people or looking into their houses. Because they want to know about us, just like we want to know about them. As for why we keep this location from the public, look at the places that I mentioned, and look how many chuckleheads go looking for them. How many of them don't come back? Do you really think 100% of the people that go missing in the forest just get lost and are never found again? What if they stumbled on one as aggressive as the Dogman from the Land Between the Lakes? What if someone came here and got hurt? That would give us more attention than we want. Or worse, what if people just kept coming here and disrupting our daily life, or turn this place into a tourist attraction like Roswell? And then there's the worst case scenario that I can think of. What if people came here looking for them, and actually succeeded in capturing or killing one, and pissed these guys off? Could they go from just scaring us to attacking us, or feeling threatened by us? What if they came for a pound of flesh? So that's why we keep our mouths shut. These animals come and go as they please. Like my friends have mentioned in the past, there are active months and there are dormant months with these creatures. It seems they're always around when the weather's colder, so Maybe they just go somewhere else during those hot months because they can't handle the heat well, or maybe they just prefer the cold. I hope this portion of our experiences finds you all well. Collaborating with Tales of the Supernatural has been a long time coming. I feel like we've been exchanging emails forever. We've been discussing this subject since at least the beginning of the year. He does a good job, and we trust him to talk about our experiences. I want to thank him for giving everyone a place to talk and share, whether or not they want to divulge their last names or first names, or even where it took place. I hope everybody listening has a good one. Sincerely, some guy from Dogman Town.